The sky outside the airplane was bright and peaceful, but inside the cabin the air felt tight like something unseen was waiting to happen. And no one knew it, yet not the children playing with their toy blasters, not the couple watching a movie, not the businessman snoring softly with his tie half loosened, and especially not the two flight attendants who smiled as they passed out drinks and snacks to the passengers in the front rows. In seat 3A sat a woman with short dark hair and tired eyes. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, and she wore a plain gray jacket that looked a bit too heavy for the weather. She had said nothing since she boarded the flight, only gave a short nod when the flight attendant asked if she wanted anything to drink. She had refused everything, even the window shade stayed down, as if she didn't want to look out at the world below. Row 3 felt like a quiet island on a loud and cheerful flight. No one seemed to notice the woman sitting there, not even the people across from her. They had no reason to look twice. She had no luggage, no books, no phone in hand. She just sat still, as if waiting for something, and maybe she was. The engines hummed softly, and the plane sailed through the clouds at 30,000 feet above the earth. It was a normal flight from Dallas to New York, and everyone expected to land in a few hours with no trouble, no fear, no change. But everything changed in an instant when the flight attendant walking past the cockpit suddenly dropped her tray and screamed, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with terror. "Something is wrong," she said. "The pilot, he just fell." People laughed. At first they thought it was a bad joke, or maybe she was overreacting, but when the other crew member ran to the cockpit and didn't come back, the laughter stopped. People began to whisper. Some started recording with their phones. Others sat up and took off their headphones. And then the fear began to grow like a storm cloud creeping down the aisle. The woman in row 3 opened her eyes slowly. She hadn't been sleeping, but she had been silent. Now she looked up and saw the panic start to build around her. She could hear the cries from the front rows. "The captain isn't responding," someone shouted. "We're not hearing anything from the cockpit," another voice added. The crew looked lost, unsure of what to do. They had training, but none of them could fly a plane. None of them could take the controls if both pilots were down. Then something strange happened. The quiet woman in row 3 stood up, her movements smooth and calm, like she was not surprised by the chaos around her, like she had done this before. Her eyes scanned the people around her quickly, and then she looked at the flight attendant blocking the cockpit door. "Let me through," she said, her voice firm but not loud. The flight attendant stared at her, unsure. "Who are you?" she asked. "You can't go in there." But the woman's eyes did not waver. She pulled a small worn badge from her jacket pocket and showed it to the flight attendant. It was old, faded, but still clear enough to read a name and a title, and a pair of wings. "Pilot." "Please," she said again, more gently. "This time, you don't have a choice." The flight attendant hesitated, then slowly moved aside. The passengers behind them watched in silence as the woman stepped into the cockpit and shut the door behind her. Inside the cockpit, the lights blinked red and orange. The sound of alarms filled the small space, and the smell of something burning was faint but real. The pilot was slumped to one side, his face pale. The co-pilot beside him was not moving either. The woman took one breath and sat down in the empty seat. Her hands moved quickly, flipping switches, checking gauges, pressing buttons. Her eyes narrowed with focus as she reached for the headset and placed it over her ears. "This is Flight 791 to New York," she said, her voice steady and sure. "The captain is down. I am taking control. Please respond." She waited for a reply, but none came. Not yet. Outside the cockpit, the passengers had no idea who she really was or what she was about to do. She stared out the windshield at the open sky, her fingers tight around the yoke. The plane trembled slightly, like it knew something was wrong. The quiet passenger in row 3 was no longer just a face in the crowd, no longer just someone sitting alone by the window. She had stepped forward when no one else could, and now the lives of everyone on board rested in her hands. And the sky was still, so calm, like it too was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. The door to the cockpit was now closed, but the fear outside it was louder than ever. The passengers whispered among themselves. Some asked if everything was okay. Some looked toward the front hoping for answers. But there was no voice from the intercom, no calm words from the pilot, only silence, and the memory of the quiet woman in row 3 stepping forward without fear. A teenage boy in row 6 leaned over to the window and tried to peek toward the cockpit door. His sister tugged his sleeve and said, "Sit down, stop staring." But he didn't listen, because deep down he could feel it too. Something big had just happened, and nothing was going to be the same again. Inside the cockpit, the alarms still flashed, and the screens blinked with warnings the plane was not falling. But it was not stable either. The woman placed her hands on the controls like they belonged there, like the yoke remembered her, just as she remembered it. She did not look back, she did not explain herself, she simply flew. Her name was Mira, that much was on the badge, but she hadn't used that name in years, not since the tribunal, not since the crash, not since they said she had no place in the skies anymore. The metal wings on that badge had been tucked away in a drawer for so long, and today they had come out, because she had a strange feeling in her chest when she saw her seat number on the boarding pass, row 3. The radio crackled suddenly. A voice finally came through. "This is New York Center. Identify yourself," the voice said with urgency. "State your rank and situation." Pilot unresponsive and co-pilot unresponsive. Mira said clearly, "I am Mira Cole, former military flight unit, retired due to medical ruling. I am assuming emergency command of this aircraft, over." There was a pause on the other end, like the voice didn't know what to say. She could almost hear someone scrambling in the control room, checking files, digging up her past. Mira Cole, the name meant something once before. The silence and shame took it away. "Acknowledge," came the reply. Finally, voice steady. "We have your record, Ms. Cole. Standing by to support you." Mira didn't smile, but her hands relaxed just a little. She adjusted the altitude and guided the aircraft away from heavy traffic zones. She studied the fuel gauge, the pressure, the engine temps. Everything still looked wrong, but not hopeless. She could still bring them home if the sky allowed it. Back in the cabin, people had started to calm down a little, not because they felt safe, but because they were waiting, hoping someone knew what they were doing. A man stood up and asked a flight attendant, "Who is she?" The one from row 3, the crew didn't know her name, but one of them said she had a pilot badge. She said she could fly, that's all we know. The man sat down again, but others started whispering, "Maybe she's a real pilot, maybe she lied, maybe she hijacked the plane." Someone said, "What if she's not even trained?" Someone else added. But no one dared go to the cockpit and challenge her. Something in the way she moved, something in her voice, made them trust her even if they didn't want to admit it. A little girl near the front tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, "Mom, do you think she's a hero?" The mother didn't answer. Right away her eyes were stuck on the closed cockpit door, and she just nodded slowly, without saying a word. Inside the cockpit, Mira heard the voices of the control tower again, asking for updates, asking for systems data, asking if she needed to reroute. She answered each one, without panic, without pause, even as sweat rolled down her neck and the smell of something burnt got stronger. She reached for the emergency panel and tapped a button, hoping it would reset the internal stabilizer. She remembered this system from years ago, how it always stuck during storms, and how you had to press just hard enough to make it click, not too hard, or it would jam. Click. The warning light blinked once, and then went off. Mira breathed deep, but she couldn't rest, not yet. She looked to the left at the captain slumped in his seat, still breathing, but unconscious, then to the co-pilot, whose head leaned against the window, barely moving. They needed medical help, and they needed it fast, but first she had to get the plane down safe. She pressed the intercom button and finally spoke to the passengers. "This is your acting pilot, Mira speaking. I am a trained flyer and I have taken control of the aircraft. We have had a medical emergency, but I am working with air traffic control to get us down safely. Please stay calm and follow all crew instructions. I will update you again shortly." Her voice was calm, firm, not too soft, not too sharp, like a stone standing steady in the middle of a storm. In row 3 her seat was empty, but everyone now looked at it like it was something more than just a seat. They looked at it like it held the heart of the sky and the hand that were trying to save them all. Dark clouds had started to form ahead, and the sky no longer looked peaceful like before. It twisted and boiled like something angry was waiting outside the glass. Mira saw it coming, and her eyes narrowed. She did not fear storms, but she respected them. Always storms had taken things from her before, and now they came again, not with rain only, but with memories sharp and cold. The passengers could not see what she saw, not yet. The clouds were far, but they were growing fast, tall as mountains, thick as smoke, moving like giants across the sky. Some people went back to their books, others closed their eyes. But in the cockpit, Mira leaned forward and reached for the overhead controls, switching the radar to wide scan. She needed every second she could buy. The radio crackled again. "This is New York Center. Be advised there is a storm system shifting into your path. It was not forecast, but satellite confirms heavy turbulence, strong crosswinds, and possible lightning." Mira responded with a short breath. "I see it," she said. "No need to reroute yet. I'll punch through if I have to." Back in the cabin, whispers turned louder. Some passengers felt the first bumps, others noticed the clouds changing through the windows, a baby began to cry, and someone asked if turbulence was normal this early in the flight. The crew walked up and down the aisle, trying to calm everyone, but their own eyes kept drifting toward the cockpit door. In row 3, the empty seat looked strange, now like it held a shadow of someone still sitting there. People glanced at it, then quickly looked away, like they didn't want to think about how close they were to something they could not understand. Myra's fingers moved across the panels. She checked fuel again, checked engine temperature, and watched the sky draw closer. The first rumble shook the aircraft gently, like a warning. The next came harder, and a tray in the galley crashed to the floor. The memory came like a ghost as the lightning flashed. She saw it again, the night of the crash 10 years ago, the black sea below the fire in the engine, her co-pilot screaming, "Pull up, Mira, pull up," but the wing was gone, and the storm didn't care. It had swallowed them whole and spit them out in pieces. She had survived barely. They called her a hero for 1 week. Then the questions came. Why had she flown into the storm? Why had she trusted the instruments? Why had she not turned back? Why had she lived when others didn't? They took her wings and her voice with them, and she never flew again, not until now, not until this plane, this sky, and this storm. Her hands gripped the yoke tighter, and she breathed slow, steady, focused. She was not that broken woman anymore. She was here, now flying again, not for glory, not for duty, just to keep the people behind her safe. She spoke into the radio again. "This is Flight 791 entering turbulence, requesting airspace priority." The tower replied, "We have cleared a corridor just for you." Mira now had a small path through the storm. It was not much, but it was enough if she was careful. The plane hit another pocket of wind and dropped fast a few feet, just enough to make hearts jump and hands grab armrests. Some passengers screamed, others held on to loved ones. But Mira did not move. She adjusted pitch and trimmed the wing controls, keeping the aircraft level again. In the cabin, a boy looked out the window and gasped as lightning danced across the clouds. It looked like fire in the sky, like dragons fighting, and the woman flying the plane was somewhere between them, steering them through it all. Mira wiped her brow and kept her eyes on the instruments. No autopilot to help her now. She was flying with hands, alone with memory, alone with skill buried deep inside her bones. She thought of the people behind her, the children, the elders, the tired workers, and the dreamers going home or chasing something new. She would not fail them no matter what waited in the clouds. The storm grew louder. Wind howled around the metal, and rain began to streak across the glass. But Mira did not flinch, her voice calm. She spoke to the passengers again. "We are passing through a weather disturbance. Please remain seated and trust your crew. We will come out of this soon." She didn't know if it was true, but sometimes the voice had to be strong even when the heart was shaking, and maybe hers was just a little, maybe not. Behind the door, people sat in silence, listening to her voice, holding onto hope that the woman in row 3 could do what no one else could. And outside, the storm roared like it wanted to break her again, but she flew on toward the light she could not yet see, but believed was waiting there ahead. The storm still screamed around the plane, but Myra's hands did not shake. Her eyes stayed sharp and her voice stayed calm, even as the cabin lights flickered and the sky growled like a living beast waiting to strike again. The aircraft jolted again, a sudden drop, then a hard rise like something had grabbed it and let go. Some passengers cried out, others gripped the armrests tight. A child sobbed into her mother's arms, and someone whispered a prayer. The flight crew moved slowly, checking on people, their own faces pale but still brave. The co-pilot beside Mira stirred for just a second, but did not wake. His lips moved like he was dreaming, maybe calling out for help, maybe caught in a nightmare. Mira glanced at him, then turned back to the controls. She knew what it felt like to wake inside a storm, to not know if you were falling or flying. The wind slammed the plane again, and a sharp alarm rang in the cockpit. A side panel warning Mira pressed a few buttons, silencing the sound, then adjusted the stabilizers. She could feel the plane slipping to the left, trying to roll, but she pulled it back inch by inch, keeping it balanced, keeping it alive. Outside, the windshield lightning flashed again, and again, each burst lighting up the clouds like giant broken bones hanging in the sky. Rain hit the glass in sheets, but Mira could still see just enough, just barely enough. She remembered her last flight, the one they called her final mission. She had flown a recon transport across enemy lines in a storm. Just like this, she had warned command that the route was unsafe. They ignored her. She flew anyway. She always followed orders back then, until everything fell apart. The engine had gone dark mid-flight, and she had to glide a burning aircraft through rain and lightning toward a mountain base. She had done it barely. Survivors had crawled from the wreckage. Mira among them bruised, burned, but breathing. They called her brave, then blamed her. When the report came, they called it human error, and took her license. They stripped her of rank, gave her no answers, and no chance to speak. She left the sky, and never looked up again until today. Now the storm felt the same, but she did not. She was stronger, not because she wanted to be, but because she had no choice. The plane shook hard again. A new warning lit up: fuel pressure low. On the right side, mirror switch systems rerouted flow to balance the tanks, and spoke into the radio again. This is Miracle Flight 791. I need priority landing, now not optional. We are short on fuel, and carrying 2 unconscious crew members over. The tower responded quickly. We are clearing a runway. For you, Mira, you are authorized to land at Newark closest open strip. You are 7 minutes from descent. We will guide you down. Mira replied, copy that, beginning descent now. She adjusted the altitude and started to bring the plane lower, each step bringing them out of the storm. Each second mattered. Now each choice a weight on her shoulders. Back in the cabin, the passengers felt the change. The shaking lessened. The clouds outside thinned, and the blue of the sky began to show again. One row at a time, people started to breathe again, not in relief, not yet, but in hope. A man in seat 11B turned to the person beside him and said, she's really doing it, isn't she? She's saving us. The woman beside him nodded and wiped her eyes. Yes, she is, and we don't even know her name. The seatbelt sign remained lit, but no one moved, no one spoke too loud. They were all listening for the next word from the woman in the cockpit. Mira focused on the numbers, her hands firm, her back straight, her mind clearer than it had been in years. She had trained for this, once lived for this, once lost it all for this once. And now she was here again, a second chance, a different sky. She thought about the people waiting below, the fire teams, the medical crews, the flashing lights that would soon line the runway. They would see a jet come and, not knowing it, had flown through memory, through fire, through ghosts. She pressed the intercom again. Passengers, we are beginning our final descent. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions. We will be landing shortly. Thank you for your calm and courage. She turned off the speaker and let her hand rest on the yoke again, steady, gentle, like holding the wing of a bird that had been broken, but could fly once more. The clouds fell behind them. The rain thinned out. The light ahead was stronger. Now the storm behind them, quieting like it had finally given up. And Miracle, the woman from row 3, the name forgotten, and the wings taken, was flying again toward the ground and toward something she never thought she would feel again. Home. The city lights came into view like fireflies scattered across the dark land below, and the runway was among them, shining like a narrow path through shadow, blinking slowly like it was calling Mira home. But the fuel warning blinked faster, now louder, redder, like a ticking clock, and the final test was not over yet. She had flown through the storm, fought the wind, and spoken to ghosts, but now she faced the most dangerous part of all, the landing, because one wrong move could end everything. And no one else could take the controls, no one else could guide them down, only her. Mira took a deep breath and spoke into the headset. This is Flight 791. We are approaching Newark. Request final vector and clearance for immediate landing. The tower responded quickly. Flight 791, you are cleared. Runway 29 straight in glide path is green, wind 12 knots. From the west, all emergency services are standing by. The runway was less than 5 minutes away, and the aircraft was running light. Mira knew she would get one clean chance to bring it down, one chance to level the descent, one chance to slow enough before the ground rose too fast. She checked every dial again, every switch, every gauge, and then she looked out the window and whispered, almost there. In the cabin, no one moved, no one spoke. The lights had dimmed, and the crew had taken their seats. People held hands, some closed their eyes, others kept staring forward, as if willing the plane to touch earth gently. Some whispered to each other, but most listened and waited. A child clutched a stuffed animal against her chest and leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, and the mother kept her eyes fixed on the empty seat in row 3, as if it might still hold something sacred or strong or real. The plane began to descend faster. Mira brought the nose down, carefully watching speed, flaps, gear pressure. Everything had to stay smooth. There was no time for second tries. The landing gear came down with a loud clunk, and a green light flickered. Yes, it was working. Yes, she still had time. The air outside grew louder as they dropped through the last layer of cloud. The lights below stretched wide, and the runway grew larger. Mira gripped the yoke and counted her breath in and out. 1, 2, 3. Hold steady, hold strong. At 1,000 feet, the tower called again. Flight 791 winds. Holding speed, confirmed. Field is clear. Mira answered, copy, final descent now. She could see the fire trucks, lining the edges, the flashing red and white lights, waiting with silence, waiting to see what would happen. She could see the faces of the ground crew staring up into the sky, watching the jet that came out of the storm like a ghost, like a story. She thought about her hands, the same hands that had once been blamed for a crash, the same hands that had held nothing but regret for years. Now they held this plane, this chance, this moment, and they did not shake. 600 feet, 500. For she adjusted the pitch flaps, down more speed dropping, just right her heartbeat, steady her eyes, never blinking. The cockpit was quiet except for the sound of the engines and the wind and the soft, shallow breath of the unconscious pilot. Beside her, she glanced at him, once then looked forward again. This was on her, this was hers alone. At 200 feet the wheels were almost touching, and the passengers braced. Everyone was holding on, and time felt like it slowed down into one long breath, held by everyone on the plane and everyone watching from the ground. Then the wheels hit the runway hard and fast and bounced once but stayed down. The brakes screamed as Mira pulled the yoke and guided the aircraft straight, and true the nose lowered slowly, and the jet rolled forward, tires smoking, speed dropping, and Mira kept her hand steady until the end. And then the plane stopped right at the center of the runway, engines off, fuel gone, and silence fell like snow across the cabin, across the cockpit, across the world. For a second no one moved, no one breathed. Then the radio spoke, Flight 79, when you are on the ground, repeat, you are safely on the ground, miracle, you did it. The passengers cheered, voices crying and shouting and clapping, strangers hugging strangers. Some people wept, some laughed. The flight attendants unlocked their belts and began to check on people, but their hands were shaking with relief. Mira sat back in her seat and closed her eyes just for a moment, just long enough to hear the sound of a heartbeat slowing down, just long enough to feel her feet touch the earth again through steel and rubber and wind. She did not cry, she did not speak, she just sat there with the ghost of her badge tucked in her jacket and the taste of the sky still fresh in her lungs. And in row 3 the seat waited empty and still, like a mark left behind by someone who had become more than anyone ever expected. The emergency lights flashed outside, and the runway filled with rescue crews. But inside the plane, everything was still for a moment, like the world was waiting to understand what had just happened. Passengers held each other. Some cried, some laughed, some simply stared at the floor, like they had just returned from somewhere far away and were not yet ready to speak. In the cockpit, Mira took off the headset and rested it on the panel, her fingers now still and quiet after guiding a machine through death and fire. She looked at the pilot slumped beside her and saw his chest rising slowly, his color returning. Little by little he would live, he would tell his story, but it would not be the same as hers. Someone knocked on the cockpit door. A flight attendant's voice asked softly, "Are you all right, miss? Are you okay?" Mira opened the door and stepped out. The hallway was narrow and bright, filled with blinking signs and wide eyes. She nodded, "I'm all right, thank you." The crew looked at her like she was a different person, like she had turned into someone else during the flight, someone they were afraid to speak to or afraid to lose. And maybe they were right, because Mira was not the same woman who had stepped into the plane in Dallas, the woman who sat in row 3 with nothing in her hands and no place to go. She moved through the cabin slowly as passengers reached out, some just to touch her arm, some just to say thank you, others too shocked to speak, just nodded. As she passed, like seeing her was enough, like her presence had become something more than human. In seat 5B the little girl looked up with wide eyes and whispered softly, "Mommy, that's her, that's the pilot." The mother smiled and said, "Yes, sweetheart, that's the woman who saved us all." Mira looked at the girl and gave a small smile, then continued toward the exit door. The stairs were rolled up to the plane, and the doors opened wide, the night air cool and fresh, the smell of burnt rubber and rain still hung in the air. The runway lit like a stage, fire trucks, ambulances, flashing cameras, already pointing, waiting for a glimpse of a mysterious woman who had landed a plane alone. Airport staff waited below with open arms, ready to rush forward, offer blankets, water, interviews, headlines. But Mira paused at the top of the stairs, her eyes scanning the crowd like a soldier walking into an old battlefield. She had not asked for any of this, not the attention, not the thanks, not the noise. She had only wanted to help, and now she wanted to disappear again. She walked down the stairs calmly, not rushed, not slow, her steps firm, like she belonged to the ground. Once more at the bottom, a young officer asked her name, and she said, "Miracle. But please, I just want to go home." He nodded slowly, understanding more than his words could say, and let her walk past. Reporters shouted questions, but she did not answer. One camera flash lit her face, and in that flash her calm eyes caught the light for a second, and then she was gone into the night, into the shadows of the airport, like a ghost vanishing between breaths. Back inside, the terminal people kept asking, who was she, where did she come from, how did she know how to fly that plane? But no one could answer. All they had was the story, the woman in row 3, the quiet one, the one no one noticed, until she stood up and changed everything. In the days that followed, news reports filled the airwaves. A mystery pilot saves passenger jet woman with unknown past lands plane. After both crew members collapse, investigation continues. Heroes among us, and similar headlines ran across every screen. But no one could find her, no one could reach her, no one knew where she went after walking down that stairway. Some said she got into a taxi and never looked back. Others claimed she walked down the runway until she vanished into the fog. Some believed she was never on the flight list to begin, with no ID, no record, just a seat number and a face that would not be forgotten. But in a small town far from the airport, a woman sat on her porch with a cup of tea in her hand and a worn badge in her pocket. She watched the sunset quietly, and when a neighbor passed and asked how her day had been, she simply said, peaceful. She did not speak of the storm or the landing or the passengers. She did not speak of the ghost in the cockpit or the voice on the radio or the little girl in row 5B who called her a hero. She just closed her eyes and let the wind pass through her hair like wings, once lost now found again. And the sky above her was clear with no clouds, only stars blinking like runway lights in the dark, waiting for someone like her to rise again if needed. But for now she rested, because the quiet woman in row 3 had already flown enough to be remembered forever.